I want to tell you about a patient of mine. His name is William. William is 72 years old, and he came to see me about 9 months ago with a piece of paper in his hand, his blood test results from his annual checkup. And on that piece of paper, his total cholesterol was 247. His LDL was 158. His triglycerides were 218, and his HDL was 38, which is low, too low. And his previous doctor had looked at those numbers and had told William that he needed to stop eating eggs, that eggs were the problem, that the cholesterol in eggs was driving his high cholesterol numbers. And William had done exactly what he was told. He had stopped eating eggs, cold turkey, 3 months before he came to see me. He missed them, he told me. He had eaten eggs for breakfast his whole life. His wife Margaret made them for him every morning, scrambled or poached or soft-boiled, depending on the day.
And stopping them was not a small thing. For a man of 72 who had built his mornings around that breakfast for most of his adult life. But he had done it because his doctor told him to, and he had come back 3 months later for a repeat blood test, and his total cholesterol was 241. His LDL was 154. His triglycerides were 224, barely changed. If anything, the triglycerides had gone up, and his doctor had told him, "William, you need to try harder. You need to cut out more fat." And William had come to see me because his daughter had watched one of my videos and had said, "Dad, I think you need a second opinion." I looked at William's results and I looked at what he was eating and I said, "William, I want you to put eggs back on your breakfast table starting tomorrow morning. And I want to tell you what is actually causing your cholesterol numbers to look like this. And it has nothing to do with eggs. I am Dr. Daniel Chen."
And what William had been told about eggs and cholesterol is one of the most persistent and most damaging nutritional myths of the past 50 years. And the real cause of his numbers was sitting on his breakfast table every single morning while everyone was busy looking at the eggs that were not the problem. So let me start with why the egg and cholesterol story became so embedded in medical and public health thinking for so many decades. Because understanding why it was wrong helps you understand what is actually right. In the 1960s and 1970s, a hypothesis emerged in nutrition science that dietary cholesterol, the cholesterol found in food, directly raised blood cholesterol, and that elevated blood cholesterol raised cardiovascular risk. This hypothesis led to public health guidance recommending that people limit their dietary cholesterol intake. And since eggs are one of the richest sources of dietary cholesterol, with one egg yolk containing approximately 186 milligrams of cholesterol, eggs became the primary target of this guidance. For decades, doctors told patients to limit eggs or avoid them entirely, particularly patients with elevated cholesterol, like William. The problem is that the hypothesis was based on an oversimplification of the relationship between dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol. That subsequent research over the following 50 years has substantially revised. Here's what we now know and what the current evidence actually shows. First, the body regulates its own cholesterol production very carefully. The liver produces approximately 75 to 80% of the total cholesterol in your bloodstream. Only 20 to 25% comes from what you eat. And the liver is not passive. When you eat more dietary cholesterol from eggs or other sources, the liver compensates by producing less cholesterol itself. When you eat less dietary cholesterol, the liver compensates by producing more. This regulatory mechanism means that for most people, eating more cholesterol from food does not produce a corresponding rise in blood cholesterol because the liver adjusts. Second, large systematic reviews and meta-analyses of the research on egg consumption and cardiovascular risk have consistently found that for most healthy individuals, eating eggs, including eating an egg every day, does not significantly raise the risk of cardiovascular disease or stroke. The 2020 dietary guidelines for Americans no longer include a specific limit on dietary cholesterol, reflecting the scientific consensus that dietary cholesterol alone is not the driver of cardiovascular risk that it was once believed to be. Now, there is a subgroup of people called hyperresponders, approximately 25 to 30% of the population whose blood cholesterol does respond meaningfully to dietary cholesterol intake in these individuals. High egg consumption can raise LDL cholesterol, and this is worth knowing and worth discussing with a doctor. But for most people, including most people over 70, eggs are not the driver of elevated cholesterol numbers. Something else is, and I want to tell you what that something else is and why it was sitting on William's breakfast table every single morning while everyone was looking at the eggs. The real driver of high triglycerides and low HDL, and in many cases, elevated LDL cholesterol in adults over 70 is not dietary cholesterol. It is refined carbohydrates and added sugars eaten consistently at high quantities over time. Let me explain the mechanism, because this is the part that most people have never been told, and that changes everything. When you eat refined carbohydrates, white bread, processed cereals, white rice, crackers, pastries, sweetened yogurts, and foods with added sugar, including many foods that do not taste particularly sweet, but that contain significant added sugar. Your blood sugar rises rapidly. Your pancreas releases insulin to bring blood sugar down. Now, here's what happens next that most people, and frankly, many doctors, do not fully appreciate. When insulin levels are elevated, the liver receives a signal to take the excess glucose from the blood and convert it into fat, specifically into a type of fat called triglycerides. These triglycerides are packaged by the liver into lipoprotein particles called VLDL, very low density lipoprotein, and released into the bloodstream. Now, when VLDL circulates in the blood and delivers triglycerides to fat cells and muscle cells, it leaves behind a smaller, denser particle called LDL, and specifically the smallest, densest, most atherogenic form of LDL called small dense LDL, which is the form most prone to penetrating the arterial wall and initiating plaque formation. At the same time, elevated insulin levels suppress the activity of an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase in the tissues that is responsible for clearing triglycerides from the blood. And they reduce the production of HDL cholesterol, the protective lipoprotein that helps clear cholesterol from arterial walls. So the pattern that elevated refined carbohydrate and sugar intake produces in a blood lipid panel is very specific and very recognizable to doctors who know what to look for. High triglycerides, low HDL, and a normal or even modestly elevated LDL, but with a shift in the composition of those LDL particles toward the smaller, denser, more dangerous form that does not always show up in the basic LDL number on a standard lipid panel. Now look at Williams' results again. Total cholesterol, 247. LDL, 158. Triglycerides, 218. HDL, 38. High triglycerides, low HDL,
That is the carbohydrate-driven pattern, written clearly in his blood test results, not the egg-driven pattern, which would more typically show elevated total cholesterol and elevated LDL, without particularly elevated triglycerides or particularly suppressed HDL. William's pattern was shouting at anyone who knew how to read it that refined carbohydrate and added sugar intake was the primary driver of his numbers, not eggs. Now, let me tell you what William was actually eating for breakfast every morning that was producing this pattern. William ate the same breakfast every single day, a bowl of bran flakes or corn flakes. He alternated between them with low-fat milk, a glass of orange juice, 2 slices of whole wheat toast with a low-fat fruit jam, and sometimes a low-fat fruit yogurt on the side. Every single item on that list, with the exception of the milk, was either a refined carbohydrate, a significant source of added sugar, or both, the bran flakes and corn flakes, as I described in my video on the breakfast foods raising blood sugar, have been through the extrusion process that gelatinizes the starch, giving them a glycemic index of 74 to 83, higher than table sugar. The orange juice contains approximately 26 grams of sugar in liquid form that enters the bloodstream almost immediately. The whole wheat toast, made from finely ground whole wheat flour, has a glycemic index of 71 to 74, almost identical to white bread, despite its healthier reputation. The low-fat fruit jam is primarily sugar with a small amount of fruit. Most commercial fruit jams contain approximately 10 to 15 grams of sugar per tablespoon. And the low-fat fruit yogurt, which William chose specifically because he was trying to eat less fat, contained approximately 18 to 22 grams of added sugar per serving. Because when fat is removed from a product, to make it low fat, sugar is almost always added to replace the flavor and texture that the fat provided. William's entire low-fat, heart-healthy breakfast was delivering approximately 60 to 80 grams of rapidly absorbed carbohydrate and added sugar every single morning before his day had even started, and his liver was converting a significant proportion of that daily sugar load into triglycerides, suppressing his HDL, generating small, dense LDL particles, and producing exactly the blood lipid pattern that his blood tests were showing every 3 months. And everyone was looking at the eggs, while the cereal, the juice, the toast, the jam, and the low-fat yogurt were sitting on the table entirely unexamined. William also told me something else that is worth mentioning, because it illustrates how difficult the nutritional environment is for older adults who are genuinely trying to make good choices. He told me that he had specifically chosen low-fat products because he had been told that fat was the problem, that fat raised cholesterol, and that choosing low-fat versions of his foods was the responsible choice for a man with his numbers. And in choosing low-fat, he had consistently chosen higher sugar because the food industry for decades has replaced the fat in low-fat products with sugar and refined starch to maintain palatability. William was following the advice he had been given to the letter, and that advice was pointing him toward the very dietary pattern that was driving the problem he was trying to fix. I told William to put the eggs back because the current evidence does not support restricting eggs for most people as a primary strategy for cholesterol management. And I told him to redesign his breakfast around the following principles. First, remove the rapidly absorbed refined carbohydrates, the processed cereal, the white toast, the fruit jam, the orange juice. Second, replace them with slow-release, nutrient-dense whole foods that do not spike insulin and do not drive the liver's triglyceride production. Third, include adequate protein at breakfast
which, as I described in my video on blood sugar, reduces the glycemic response to any carbohydrate eaten at the same meal. And fourth, include foods with specific cholesterol-improving properties that have real clinical evidence behind them. The breakfast I designed for William was this: 2 eggs scrambled in a small amount of olive oil, or poached, or soft-boiled, however Margaret preferred to make them, on a slice of genuine sourdough bread made from long-fermented dough with a glycemic index significantly lower than whole wheat bread, with 1/3 of an avocado on the side, which provides monounsaturated fat that supports HDL production, and a bowl of whole rolled oats made as porridge, with a tablespoon of ground flaxseed and a small handful of fresh or frozen berries, for the beta-glucan that binds to bile acids and reduces LDL cholesterol, and for the flaxseed lignans that reduce LDL oxidation, and a glass of water or unsweetened green tea instead of the orange juice. William made this change for 12 weeks and came back with his results. His total cholesterol was 198. His LDL was 119. His triglycerides were 142, down from 218. His HDL was 47, up from 38. He had put eggs back on his table, and his cholesterol numbers were better than they had been in years. He looked at me and he said, "Dr. Chen, I stopped eating the one thing that wasn't the problem, and nobody noticed until I found you." And I want to say something about that because it matters. The association between dietary cholesterol, eggs, and blood cholesterol was taught to an entire generation of doctors as settled science, and it took decades for the research to revise that teaching. Many doctors who qualified in the 1980s and 1990s were taught the egg cholesterol link as fact. And when the science changed, the messaging in clinical practice did not always change with the same speed. William's doctor was not wrong to be concerned about his cholesterol. His doctor was trying to help him, but the advice given was based on a model of cholesterol metabolism that the subsequent research has substantially revised. And the model that the research now supports points much more clearly toward refined carbohydrates and added sugars as the primary dietary drivers of the specific pattern that William's blood tests were showing. Let me bring everything together now. High cholesterol after 70, particularly the pattern of high triglycerides, low HDL, and elevated or borderline LDL, is far more commonly driven by refined carbohydrate and added sugar intake than by dietary cholesterol from eggs. The mechanism is insulin-driven. Elevated insulin from repeated rapid blood sugar spikes signals the liver to convert excess glucose into triglycerides, suppresses HDL production, and shifts LDL composition toward the smaller, denser, more atherogenic particles that drive arterial plaque more powerfully than the total LDL number alone. Reveals the common breakfast foods most responsible for this pattern. In older adults are processed cereals, orange juice, white or whole wheat toast made from fine flour, fruit jam, and low-fat products in which the removed fat has been replaced with sugar and refined starch. These foods, chosen specifically by health-conscious older adults because they were told they were the right choices, are very often the primary driver of the cholesterol numbers that are worrying their doctors. The alternative, built around eggs, whole rolled oats with ground flaxseed, genuine sourdough, avocado, fresh berries, and water or green tea in place of juice, addresses the underlying mechanism rather than restricting the food that was not causing the problem. William's triglycerides dropped from 218 to 142. His HDL rose from 38 to 47. His LDL dropped from 158 to 119, with eggs back on the table every single morning, made by Margaret, the way she had always made them, because they were never the problem. I am Dr. Daniel Chen. If this video finally explained something that you have been confused about for years, please share it with someone over 70 who has also been told to stop eating eggs and who is still watching their cholesterol numbers go in the wrong direction. Subscribe to this channel for weekly videos made with genuine care for older adults who deserve real information about their own health. And leave me a comment below. Tell me what you have been eating for breakfast every morning and whether anyone has ever talked to you about refined carbohydrates and your cholesterol numbers. I read every single comment, and I genuinely look forward to hearing from you. Take care of yourself and enjoy your eggs tomorrow morning. They have been waiting to come back to your table.